Wake up with the sunrise, meditate to clear my mind. Thank you for this breath. I'm ready to be
Hello and
surprised.
welcome
Don't know where
to
I'm going,
this
but I know
healing
it's
session. I am your fearless hostess, Rachel W. Robinson, victim rights attorney, also contributing author to an international best-selling book, a poet, a lyricist, a gardener, and so many other aspects of my personality that I was able to tap into on my healing journey. And so, of course, I'm offering that to all of you through these healing sessions. And today I have a really special guest to talk to us about what it's like to be an actual survivor and how she has transmuted her pain into her purpose. Her name is Jan Canty. She is a psychologist, writer, photographer, educator, consultant, and cancer survivor. She holds a terminal degree in psychology and a postdoctoral fellowship from Wayne State University School of Medicine, Department of Family Medicine.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Tell us about Jan Canty. Who are you and how did you come to be?
Well, beyond what you've already said, my life started out pretty even and positive. I came from a very strong and happy family. My parents were madly in love the whole time they were together. I had lots of friends. I was healthy. I lived in a very densely populated area of Detroit, so I had a bunch of friends. So life seemed pretty even, and thank goodness I had a very strong foundation going into adulthood because I didn't know how much I was gonna need that. My goal was to get my doctorate before I turned 30, and I made it by 1 month. I was the first one in my family to even go to college. And my family didn't understand that. They were like, "Well, how many times do you have to graduate?" They didn't quite understand the process, but they were going along with it. And then, the roof caved in pretty much in 1985 in July, when in my 11th year of marriage, my husband failed to come home. It was a very stormy night leading into the afternoon and into the evening, and he went missing for 10 days and was found murdered later. So that was a real pivot from my earlier years.
You're familiar with the term homicide survivor from our friend Terry Garza. She defines that as the friends and family of a person who dies by homicide.
Right.
And that's you. You would identify yourself as being a part of that group. Can you describe your immediate feelings though when you found out that your husband had been killed?
When I was sitting across from Gil Hill in the Department of Homicide within the Detroit Public Police Station headquarters, and he's a very blunt person, very short on words. And when told me, we have every reason, we don't have a body yet, but we have every reason to believe your husband's been murdered. It was like I felt like I'd been hit over the head. I felt stunned. I saw people's lips moving, but I couldn't make sense of what they were saying. I felt like I was in padding. Everything about me felt numb and in slow motion. My legs felt weak, and I found myself staring at this spot on the floor. And I looked up and I looked at my dad's face. He was sitting next to me, and I could tell he was trying to get me to stand. And I couldn't, so he propped me up and got me up, and then I realized it was like a skipped CD where you or a broken phone call where you get bits and pieces, but not the whole sentence, and I realized we were on our way to the morgue, and I'd been accompanied then at that point by Detective Marlis Landeros, and it was a Sunday morning, very early, and so the immediate reaction was one of brokenness. It was all my senses weren't functioning right. I couldn't the room turned blue, I felt dizzy, I couldn't make sense of what was going on. I realize now, looking back, I was in shock. But subjectively at the time, you feel extremely vulnerable, like you're a putty in their hands, and you don't know what to say or do or what's going on around you. It's a very confusing time, real departure from feeling in control.
And of course, there were charges filed eventually against someone, correct? And that person was brought to justice, so to speak. And that was also not in your control. It's the state bringing that into control. Can you tell us about your experience with the legal process?
As far as the law enforcement end of it went, I had the continuum. I had the best of the best with Detective Marlis Landeros. She was an admirable, talented, professional, intuitive, kind-hearted supporter. I trusted her. I trusted her skills. She was the first woman of color to be in the homicide division. She was good at what she did. I felt without her, I don't think I would have gotten through it as well as I did. She made such a strong impression on me that 30 years later, when I learned her daughter called me on Christmas morning one year, 2020, to tell me her mother had been killed in a traffic related accident at work and asked me to do the eulogy. I flew back to Detroit to do it. That's how strong of a connection we had.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I also had the other end of the continuum where all the other law enforcement personnel, including Inspector Gilhill, were very impersonal. I felt like a spectator, very much on the margins, just kind of being led around by whatever it is they wanted me to do. They were very businesslike, very short on words. On the other hand, I felt confident in them, like they'd get to the bottom of it and they knew what they were doing. But in no way did I feel supported or understood or that I was even important, really, in the whole process. So the law enforcement end of it was A to Z, everything in between. The legal end of it, I was subpoenaed to go to the preliminary exam, so I had no choice to go. And it was awful. I came down to the court hearing. There was a security check at the beginning of at the entrance to the building, which is typical. Then we went through a secondary search at the courtroom, which was not typical. And I went from that doorway up to the witness stand. There was zero preparation. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't really clear on why I was even there because I had no knowledge. I didn't observe the crime. I didn't know the people involved. So I kept thinking, why am I even here? It made no sense. The questions from the prosecutor made no sense to me. And the defense attorney declined. He stipulated to my testimony. I felt then, and I feel now, that he just wanted me out of there as quick as he could get me out of there. It was unnerving because it was the first time I saw the two defendants sitting at their table. One he was looking away and at his hands, and I kept from the witness stand staring at his hands, knowing what they had done. And his accomplice looked utterly bored, like she didn't even want to be there. She was checked out. My guess is she was withdrawing from drugs, but I don't know that for a fact. So the legal end of it, the preliminary hearing was so impersonal. In fact, I had a few words with the prosecuting attorney because right before I was to go to the witness stand, the prosecutor asked to have me go in with him to see the judge. And so did the defense attorney came in. And I think what was going on, because nothing was ever explained to me, but I think what was going on was both of them changed their mind at the last minute and didn't want me to testify. And once I got the drift of that, I was incensed. I was so angry. I'm like, how dare you, one, make me come down here against my wishes, and two, now that I'm ready and I have gotten all my gear, I'm geared up to do it, you want to rip out the rug from under me. And I told the prosecuting attorney, who was a good 12 to 14 inches taller than me, I said, I don't see this as your case. I know you do. I do not. This case belongs to me. This happened to me and my family, not to the city of Detroit, not to the citizens of Michigan. I know you see it that way, but I do not. And I have the right to go to the witness stand at this point. Put me on. And he said, okay. So that was disconcerting. I'm like, again, I'm on the periphery. I'm a accessory. I'm irrelevant. So I get on the witness stand and he asked the dumbest question. I wasn't on the witness stand more than what seemed like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and all the news media was there. It was very, very crowded. In fact, a little side note, what happened on my way in, it was very crowded. I was very angry at that point. I had shifted out of being fearful to being very angry. That this went from July when my husband was murdered to now we're into December. So I had been on the slow boil this whole time. And when I walked in that courtroom, and to my left in the front was the defendant sitting at their table. As I walked by their table, I pretended like I'd been jostled by the crowd, and I slammed my hand on their table, supposedly to balance myself. But I was really saying, I'm here and we got you. I
Mm.
was so angry. Like, how dare you take anybody's life? How dare you? And to do it in such a public way that they did. By that, I mean they disposed of his body parts on the freeway. They couldn't have been more public. How dare you crash into my life when I don't even know you? I was so mad. So basically, I got up there. I had a very brief testimony, and I made up my mind then and there not to go to the trial unless I was subpoenaed to go, and I was not. So at that point, I felt like, screw it. This has nothing to do with me. I'm out of here. And I made a point to actually leave the state during the trial in case the media camped out inside of my house or my office. And I went to see my parents in Arizona and stayed there for the week during the trial. And I didn't even care the outcome. I felt like it didn't matter. No matter what happened, it wouldn't change my life. I'd still be a widow. I'd still be bothered by the media. I'd still have all the complications that homicide brings. None of that was going to get fixed. So screw it. I was out of there. And if I had the choice today, I would do it all over the same way. Now,
Mm.
I want to quickly add not every homicide survivor feels that way. I want to add that some people feel very committed to being there and want to be at every little hearing and nuance. But I was the other way. I'm like, mm-mm, I'm not a part of this. You can have it.
It sounds like a lot of that was based upon the way that you were treated in the court system and how little effort was made to even help you understand what was going on.
There was no effort made,
Wow.
no preparation. It was just a subpoena, and there you go.
And it sounds like and then you mentioned how the media was covering it so much. Can you describe that media coverage and how you experienced that and the effect it had on you?
The media coverage was relentless, and I know now, I didn't know then why, and that is because it had all the ingredients of a popular news story. It was salacious. It involved people that were not criminals. It was a very grisly crime. And there was this big contrast in their story. We're dealing with pimps and prostitutes and sex workers and drug dealers, as well as people with PhDs. It was a bizarre combination. They were camping outside my house. And when the funeral came a few days later, I went an hour and a half early for the sole purpose to tell the funeral director that I did not want the media allowed inside. And he said, well, we can't stop them. I mean, it's public sidewalk. It's a public street. I said, I realize that, but it's your building. I do not want them in here. They will be in here. And he goes, well, we won't know who's part of the media and who's part of the regular people coming. So I knew at that moment they weren't going to help me and that the media would be taking over. And they did. It got so ugly. There was so many of them. They parked their vans with those satellite dishes in front of the building. They made no secret to their presence. They took out notepads. They talked loudly among themselves to the
Mhm.
point where one of the people that was a relative of my husband turned around and said to them, haven't you had you fill your bastards? And an
Mm.
argument broke out at the funeral.
Mm.
And I'm like, I'm out of here. The earliest I could, I got up and left before it was over. I went out a back door, and went home and locked the door and closed the drapes. I just felt like this was a public entertainment. It was, again, I had no connection to the process. It was for public consumption. I felt like the only thing missing was popcorn. Back up, when I had to go from Inspector Gilhill's meeting to the morgue, it was very early on a Sunday morning, and she drove me over there. She was so kind. She did not, I don't know this for a fact, but I don't believe she needed to come with me. But she was there, and she went into the booth with me, and she literally propped me up with her arm under mine. And I couldn't talk when she asked me. She prepped me. She said, I'll never forget it. She said, "We want you to go in there and identify him so you are understanding he's never coming home. And we need this for the court case. And this is what you're going to see." And she described, he'd been buried for 10 days. It was not a pretty sight. He'd been dismembered. What I was going to be identifying primarily was his head on a table. And she prepped me for that. She prepped me for the odor. And she said, all I need is a yes or a no. That's it. You say, and you can't nod. You have to say yes or you have to say no. And that's it. That's all we need. And we got in there and I couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't, no word, no voice came. She was very patient. I was so out of it. I don't know if other people were in the room. I really don't recall that. But I remember my dad being on one side of me, her being on the other side of me. And we had to do the whole process over. She had to say some official stuff. I don't remember what it was, case number, that kind of thing. We went through it again and I said yes. That was it. She turned me around. She led me out the door. We were headed out the building, and she was much more aware of what was going on than I was. And she said, stop, stop. And I looked at her like, what? And she looked out the windows on the door, and it was loaded with media. And they had those big sound booms with microphones right at the entrance of the morgue. And she whisked me around and she took me out the back entrance and said, I want you to lay down in the back seat. And again, I felt like putty in their hands, like whatever, whatever. Okay, I'm ragdoll. That's how I felt. So she whisked me away from there without any sound bites for the media's consumption. So the media was not only bad in the beginning, but it was relentless. It did not let up. Even 18 months later, they were still reporting it. And I got to the point where the public felt entitled, like they knew me, like they come up to me in public. I tried not to be in the public. Occasionally I had to go to the store and occasionally I had to get gas. And they would ask me intrusive questions like I owed them an answer. And I think that happens when your face is in the news all the time. And so I started sleeping at my friend's house. She let me do that in her guest room so they wouldn't be outside my house anymore. But after 18 months of this, I'd had it. And I moved away permanently. I gave up my practice, sold my house, said goodbye to my friends, and left. So the media made a huge impact on the course of my life, really. And I decided to move to a place where nobody, and this is back in 85 without the internet. So you could start over. And I moved to a place where nobody knew me, and I did not speak of it for 30 years.
Well, I'm grateful that you're speaking about it now, and I'm sure that the survivor community is as well. We will talk about the books that you have when we get to the end here. But the public does indeed seem to have an obsession with crimes and crime shows. And you've had time to reflect on it now, 30 years later, 30 odd years later. Why do you think that is, that the media was feeding this insatiable appetite that the public seems to have for these types of stories and shows?
Well, I think there's probably more than one reason. I don't think in any particular order, but I think one reason that the public is consumed with true crime is because it's a diversion. It's entertainment, pure entertainment, like it's a movie. Here's an example. One woman that I interviewed from my podcast, Tanya Baines Godwin, her father was murdered live on Facebook Live. and it turned into entertainment. She was getting posts from people saying, "I saw that old man, your dad. That was pretty cool what happened." Months later, she went to a dinner theater, and unbeknownst to her, there was a comedian as the opening act. He started referring to some of the stuff on the Facebook Live of her murder as part of his stand-up comic routine.
Mm.
So it's purely entertainment for some people. I think a reason that's frequently given, and I'll give you why I don't believe this is true, but a frequent reason given is that they know that more women than men consume true crime. And it's often stated that they do so to learn from it, so that should they ever be in a situation, they'll have a better idea of how to handle the situation or how to avoid it altogether. And here's two reasons I don't buy that. One reason is any discerning consumer of true crime has to know they're not watching a documentary. This is not a how to. This is a version of the truth. No true crime show, no matter how carefully it's done, you can't condense 18 or 2 years worth of an unfolding story into 2 hours and get it accurate. There's just no way you can do that. So they have to know they're watching a version of the truth. If they were really hell bent on feeling safe and wanting to learn, they'd be better off taking martial arts classes, going to a shooting range, and reading great books like The Gift of Fear, or watching podcasts like Laura Richards, who's a former Scotland Yard murder homicide detective. Then they would truly be learning. The second reason I don't buy it is because if that's the reason, if that's the motive, well, why do we keep asking the same question and producing more and more of it? It's already been answered. There's all kinds of information available to you out there. So why keep producing it? That doesn't connect in my mind. It would be like saying, "Well, I want to learn how to handle a fire in my home, so I'm going to watch a docudrama about a fire in a home."
Over
It
and
just
over and over and over again. Yeah.
I'll watch this story and that story and the other story, learn how to handle a fire in my house. You're just
Mhm.
going to do that. It just doesn't make sense. The third, I think, possible reason, and I do think there is a lot of merit to this theory, is that people can sit within the comfort of their home on a couch and watch these true crime knowing they're safe and get an adrenaline boost and give them an opportunity to become a Monday morning quarterback, to second guess what's going on, to say, "Well, isn't it obvious she shouldn't have taken that route home?"
Mm.
Or, "Why did she date that guy when he said this and so on the Tinder app?" In other words, what I'm saying is I think people can feel entitled to second guess what they would do in that situation. They want all the adrenaline rush, but in a feeling of safety, kind of like going on a roller coaster or a haunted house on Halloween. You want the adrenaline rill and you want a sense of danger, but you want the guarantee of safety.
Mm.
Well, homicide survivors don't have that luxury of safety. And we don't have the luxury of Monday morning quarterbacking. And I think what's behind it is this. There's a theory in psychology which I think has a lot of merit, and it's called the just world hypothesis. And what it means is many people are taught as we grow up that it's a just world in the bigger picture. You reap what you sow, you make your bed, you sleep in it. So the flip side of that means if I cross my T's and dot my I's, if I'm a good person, if I take precautions, if I avoid dangerous areas, blah, 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 then I'm going to be protected. This stuff can't happen to me. They want to believe that. And when someone like me comes along, or Tanya Godwin, whose father, it can happen to you. That's why we have murdered 2-year-olds.
Mm.
You can't blame them. They didn't bring it upon themselves. It is not a just world. There is no guarantee. It's an equal opportunity club. And when people understand that, it rattles them, as it should. Now, that said, I do want to add homicide is rare. Suicide is much more common, and abuse, severe physical abuse is much more common. So the chances of you being a homicide victim are not great. They're not. It's a rare event, but there are no guarantees. No matter how you lead your life, it can reach in and find you. I don't care how wealthy you are. I don't care how careful you are. I don't care how well you treat other people. It can find its way into your life, but the chances of it happening are rare. So I think the just world hypothesis and people feeling that they can learn from it in order to feel superior and safe is what's really behind it.
Mm, that's a yes, that resonates. That's a great yeah. I think a lot of people will resonate with that theory, and it's a shame that that's how people need to feel. It shouldn't be off the backs of people who have gone through it. And
And I want to quickly add that mental health personnel who are not skillful are equally at fault for this just world hypothesis Monday morning quarterbacking by under the guise of taking, this is again not the ones that are well trained. Under the guise of taking a history, they'll imply it. They'll say things like, "Your sister doesn't lock the service door between her house and her garage? Your sister, does she normally come home that late at night?" Implication being she shouldn't. She should have known better. Therefore, she put herself in the risk situation. So it's not just true crime survivors that have this just world hypothesis, but I think it's everybody almost can be prone to it.
and so not only are we feeding this desire to victim blame, they're also profiting off of it. And so it's another form of an exploitation. And one of the theories that one of the legal areas that I've researched and helped victims with is the right to privacy or right to use of their image. And under the law, there's two legal theories under common law, meaning like case law. We don't have a lot of statutes yet in the States, which I think is something I would want to push for. But under general law, people have a right to their image. They have a property right to their image and under certain circumstances. And then they also have a privacy right. And so we have a certain right to privacy that's sort of cobbled together based on the spirit of the US Constitution. And then we can also kind of look at decisions that the courts have made in regards to using images and invasion of privacy for and you taking images for that and sort of cobble together this underlying common law right to privacy when it comes to our images. And so it's been astounding for me to learn from you and other survivors about how exploitative those shows really are with no regard for these legal concepts. And then there's no recourse because oftentimes survivors don't realize that they could potentially bring legal cases against these entities taking these big stories and profiting the way that they are. And even if they know that they can, where will they find, the resources to go up against these entities? And so it needs to be enshrined in the statutes. We need to have policymakers on it and really protecting crime victims. I don't know why that has become such an exception to the general rule of people's rights to their image. And so it'd just be interesting to kind of figure out why. I wonder if it's just because by nature criminal cases are public. But however, we now have victim rights laws and they protect the privacy of victims. And so now as a victim rights attorney, I'm looking at where these newer laws actually provide an avenue under which to bring legal action against these entities or to persuade legislators to build upon the protection rights that are already in there to let them transcend over into media coverage and journalism. So it's very stressing and alarming. I learning more about it all the time from people who experienced it. And then in regards to the legal experience that you had and how there was just no time. I mean, this is where I come in. This is the gap that I stand in, and it happened quite organically for me, as you know. And and just wanting more advocacy in that way, having attorneys who can step in, make sure victims are heard, and then be able to take the time to explain and translate for survivors what's going on in court would have. It sounds like likely been really incredibly helpful for you during that time. What other supports and legal advocacy could be done? And then outside of even the legal world, just the real world supports and advocacy that you believe would be helpful when it comes to legal and media for survivors.
Well, we need a lot of support, you're right. One of the other, things that I think we need is to have financial support. The average family, the aftermath, they're put in the hole about $15,000 following a murder. For example, funeral costs. Most homicide victims don't have life insurance because they're young. So they have to pay for a funeral or cremation or a burial plot. And not only does that money they have to come up with, but there's a sales pitch involved. So we do have the funeral rule, but I don't think people are aware of it. And what good does a consumer protection have if you're not aware of it?
Mm.
Funeral rule. Bring it with you. Have a friend bring it with you to the funeral home. We need
What is
also
that?
protection.
Would you like to share it with everyone?
The funeral rule is put out by the Commerce Department, and funeral homes must follow it. It says things, just for example, any container you could bring up, you could say, I want a pine box. In fact, I want to build my own pine box and bring it into your funeral home and not have the $2,500 casket. I want them put in this pine box. They have to go along with that.
Hmm.
They have to. That's legal. There's other protections built in, like they have to be able to put in writing the costs involved, and they must tell you what's optional versus what is legally required.
Hmm.
They should tell you that embalming is not required if burial occurs within, I think it's 72 hours. But they may not tell you that.
Hmm.
And sadly, when there has been some undercover investigations done to find out about compliance, it's not there. There's no teeth in it. So funeral homes are getting away with going around the funeral rule despite the fact that there's the law there. They also have a thing where they will say, well, if you do have, let's say, life insurance, they'll ask you to sign off and be you and function in your place to save you the grief. Let's us deal directly with your insurer. Just sign here, save you all the paperwork and headache. But what they don't tell you is they can pad that bill and put in services you don't want or need.
Hmm.
They turn it into the insurance company. The insurance company pays them. They may not do those services. How are you going to know? And you may not have wanted them. Maybe it's against your religion.
Hmm.
Or if they say and do something that is wrong, it violates your policy, it can totally null and void your insurance policy, and you're stuck with the whole bill.
Wow.
So the funeral rule talks about all this. It does not apply to cemeteries. It only or crematoriums. It only applies to funeral homes. But they're not going to tell you that you can order a casket on Amazon or Walmart and have it delivered within 3 days at a fraction of the cost. They're not going to tell you things like don't. They're going to try to sell you the showroom model with the super gasket on it to protect the body. That's not the purpose of a casket. And in fact, it's dangerous. It can cause explosions.
Oh. Mhm.
So that's one whole industry that exploits homicide survivors. Another one is biorecovery companies. If the murder happens under your roof, whether it's your business or your house, and you call, let's say, Spalding Biorecovery, who's notorious for this, to come in, they will film their activities before and after the cleanup, post it on YouTube, and make money off of you.
Mm.
There's
Mhm.
no law against it that I know of. There are now florists that will steer you towards funeral homes. So you might be buying the roses for the ceremony and, oh, you should go see Smith Funeral Home, which are now become conglomerates. They've cobbled up the family funeral homes, and the price has quadrupled. So my point being that funerals are getting more and more expensive. Families are not prepared for it. I mean, unexpected deaths bring unexpected bills. You've got funeral costs, you've got cremation costs, perhaps you've got a burial cost if you have mortuary, and another area of finances is if it's a cold case, you might end up hiring a former PI or a detective to help you get the case out. and solved. You probably are going to have extra babysitting expenses because you're required to meet with the DA. You're required to go to the preliminary hearing, let's say, or a court case and testify. You can't bring a little kid into the courtroom for that. So you might have extra babysitting costs involved. You might have extra medical bills involved because you're so stressed that now you've got health issues. So families need help with that. They need help with, like I said, exploitation, and they need information. I would, in an ideal world, what I would like to have happen is to have a federal branch of the government come up with a pamphlet that is part and parcel of emergency rooms and EMS service providers, mortuaries, funeral homes, to say, here, you need to know this basic information, who to contact for a support group, um, the importance of contacting your physical healthcare provider, your rights under the funeral roll. Just basic stuff in one pamphlet could be a godsend, and to make it at points of contact, because the help that you need is so fractured. They're not coordinated, so that for example, the homicide detective doesn't know where to refer you to a support group. That's a whole another area. And the people in the support groups can't prepare you for court. They don't know what a preliminary hearing is. So they're not going to be that helpful if you're headed to court. We need coordination of services badly. We need more victim advocates. I know that there are out there in many areas now, but from what I hear from my guests on the podcast, they're lucky to get a call back. They're overworked, or they're not doing their job right. I don't know what the problem is, but they're not getting the services that they're entitled to by a victim advocate. And even when they are, those services end after the verdict. That's when our nightmare begins. That's when we shift into second gear. Now we've got to deal with cleaning up their effects at our house. We've got to deal with the financial fallout. We've got to deal with the media still. There are so many after effects that will go on up into and including parole. And by the time, if it's been a solved crime, and that's 50% of the time, there's often no support at the time of parole. You're there by yourself almost 100% of the time. There is no such thing as closure. And nobody prepares you for the long haul. Doesn't happen. Friends typically drop out after 3 months. They're there at the beginning when the crime first happens. You have a gush of support. But what happens after about 3 months is you become stigmatized. You are that family living in that house where that thing happened in the neighborhood. And now you're the poster child for crime in the neighborhood, and people want to step away because they don't know what to say to you, and because they don't want to be involved in that stigma. So you're alone, pretty much, and you have to develop new friendships. You need to be aware of all this, because if you don't, you'll think it's just you, and it isn't. That's standard.
Where can people find the support groups, find more people in the same situation?
Some states do a better job than others. Compassionate Friends is one option. It's online. You can find Compassionate Friends. Probably the best organized nationally, in fact, now internationally, group is Parents of Murdered Children, POMC. They do a pretty good job, but they're not available in all areas. POMC. Another one is Homicide Inc. And in 2023, they had a recent change of address on the internet. So you have to make sure that their address is the most current one, Homicide Inc. Another one is the Homicide Survivor Support Group in Arizona, but they're more for Arizona, but they're really helpful. And even with Parents of Murdered Children, if let's say your spouse was the one that was murdered, they'll try to help you find the proper help. Another excellent resource, and it isn't specific to children. It is specific to children, but not children who've lost somebody from murder. It could be from an accident. It could be from a debilitating illness. Is the Dougie House, DOUGY, out of Portland. They are phenomenal. They will help you no matter what state you're in.
Mm.
And their specialty is grief work with children, and they are wonderful. They have a podcast, they have a bookstore, they have therapists. So if you have a children that's involved in a grief situation, I highly recommend the Dougie Center.
What can a friend or family member say to someone who's been a homicide survivor? How can you be supported interpersonally through
Yeah.
this situation?
I think an early message, there's two very important early messages to get across to them. And this is assuming you know them well. This isn't a casual friend. But if you know them well, I think what you can say to them is this kind of awful thing can happen to anybody. I realize that. You didn't bring this upon yourself. And secondly, I'm here for you. I will not tell you what to do, but I'm here for you. I will help you find resources. I will make sure you're safe. That's the because that's not on our minds, but we need to think about safety in the first days after the arrest and as the court proceedings unfold, because supporters of the accused could be gunning for you because they may assume you know more than you know, or that it was up that you have evidence, or that you turned them in. They don't know the facts necessarily. So and safety is not on our mind. We're just embroiled in loss. So a good friend can say, I will make sure you're safe. I will run errands for you to the store so you don't have to be out in public. I will find information as you need it. I will make sure that food is available. I know you're not hungry, but particularly if they're diabetic, you need to eat and be hydrated. You need to have an appointment with your healthcare provider earlier rather than later. You're going to develop health problems and make your pre-existing or what we call premorbid conditions worse. I'm here for you, but I will never force this down your throat. You will always have the last say, always. I'm here with just the information. You can do with it what you want. I think that's extremely important because we are already feeling out of control, so we don't need somebody bossing us around and telling us what to do. They also can become extremely useful, very, very important in the early hours or days of running interference with the media. That could be locking the door and putting a note on it saying, go away, don't ring the bell, don't call. It could be, we will be a spokesperson for you if you want us to, or if you have somebody you want us to find as a spokesperson, maybe it's your attorney or a preacher or a neighbor or a relative, we will get a hold of that person and use them as a spokesperson to buffer you from the media. We will make sure your children are not part of any such of events. Um, it's a feeling of protection, a feeling of having a buffer who's not going to tell you what to do, who's leaving you with the choices and the decisions is so valuable. And for any friend can do that who wants to. And then once you're rested, even if it's a cat nap, the other thing that a friend can and hopefully will do is allow you to talk without giving you advice, without telling you what to do, without giving you bumper stickers. That's what I call them. With things like God won't give you more than you can handle. Oh, really? Well, I'm feeling that way. I mean, you just need a pair of ears to sit there and listen because you're not going to get that any other place.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And what about more casual interactions? Maybe people at work that maybe you're not close to, but they know of a loss. How would you approach someone in that more casual or more acquaintance level relationship?
I think people who don't know you as well, like neighbors and coworkers, very distant family, I think all they can say is honestly, I really don't know what the right words are. I'm at a loss. All I want to have you know is that I'm here for you and I feel bad for you. I want to help you. And then if you see a need, raise it. Like, how about I cut your grass for the next month rather than say, I'm going to send you a casserole?
Mm.
Here's an example. I was at work one day when my coworker happened to be talking with her and she took the phone call where her husband had committed suicide. She went pale and she put the phone down, and she was a very heavy set woman. It was very hot that week. It was summer. And she was saying, I don't know how I'm going to get my grass cut. I don't know how I'm going to get my grass cut. I can't do that. I've got so many health problems. It was really upsetting to her.
Mm,
So I said to her, I'll get your grass cut till the end of summer. That's what
mm,
I'm going to do. So, and I don't believe in any world would she have called me, because we tend to say, well, call me if you need something. In no world would she have called me and said, hey, would you cut my grass or get my grass cut for the next 2 months? She would never have done that.
mm,
So rather than say, call me if you need something, because we don't know what we need, but you might look in on us and say, your car needs washing. Let me do that for you. Or I'm going to get your grass cut. Or I'm going to go grocery shopping for you. Or I'm going to take the kids to the zoo this weekend. Um, I'll clean your house for you. Whatever it is, that would be so nice. Or if it's another coworker, another thing you can do is to say, hey, tell me what you want the message to be to everybody else at work. Do you want them to leave you alone? Pretend like they don't know nothing? Do you have a message you want me to send
mhm,
out to them? Like this may be a poor example, but I had a miscarriage once, and I had a coworker call me and say ahead of time, when you get back to work next week, how much, if any, do you want the? Because they knew I was out on maternity leave.
mhm,
How much do you want them to know? And I said, please tell them so I don't have to.
mhm,
Please tell them I had a miscarriage. I don't want to say that 30 or 40 times.
mhm,
Tell them I had a miscarriage and that I'll talk about it if and when I'm ready. But I don't but that's it. End of discussion.
mhm.
Sometimes something like that.
And how would you advise like police officers and prosecutors to engage with survivors?
Well, a couple things. I think one is that we need to know that they're there to protect us. They're not there to we're not just a number, which is how at least I felt. That they know what they're doing. They've been down this road before. I'm not saying that they need to hold our hands. We're not there for that. I understand that. It's like going to the emergency room. If you have a broken leg, you don't want a physician crying. You want them to say, I can fix it. It's kind of like that.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean they have to be unkind. They can make a world of difference with one or two sentences. That's all it'll take. Saying something like, boy, if I was in your shoes, this would be overwhelming. And I would know what's up and what's down, but I'm here because I am an expert and I'm going to get to the bottom of this if at all possible. And
mhm,
I'm going to make sure that you get the resources that you need by making sure that our victim advocates are there or by making sure that we have this new pamphlet that Dr. Canty recommended or whatever. It doesn't take a lot. A sentence can make a world of difference. Here's another example. I had some surgery done last summer and it was pretty business as usual, checking in and all that, and I'm ready to go under, and this redheaded anesthesiologist walked in, and she looked at me, and she sat down, and she said, "I just want you to know, I pray for every patient before I come in that morning, and you included. Is that all right with you?" I was dumbfounded. Like, "I'm a person to you?"
mhm,
I mean, I'm still dumbfounded that she said that, and I said, "Yes, that would be nice," and she prayed for me, and she said, "Because not we can offer more than good medicine. We can offer our sincerest prayers for your recovery."
oh,
That's all she said. 1 or 2 sentences, she went out and did her thing, and everything turned out fine. So it doesn't take a lot is my point. Just being a human being, relating to another human being is all it takes. I'm not saying promise something you can't deliver. I'm not saying dissolve into a puddle of tears. And I think it's quite honest to say I don't know the right words, but my role in this is thus and so, and I'm going to try to do my best on your behalf and for the loved one. And use their name. Don't use the word the body, the
mm,
victim,
mhm,
which is very common, or use your last name. It's and especially in court, they refer to it as the body or the victim. I'm like, no, that was my husband. He had a first and last name.
These insights have been so enlightening, Jan. Thank you so much for sharing those. Now, I want to hear about how we can find you. I want to hear about your books and where we can find you on social media. Tell us about that.
I try to keep things simple if I can. The main way to connect with me would be through my website, which is www.jancanty, that's Canty, jancantyphd.com. Everything's there. I'm not on Instagram. I do TikToks, and I do have a blog on my website that I try to keep up with that has a lot of information on it for survivors, not just limited, by the way, to homicide survivors. Some of it's for other kinds of hardship. So I have an active blog. I'm on TikTok. And as for my books, there are two. One is called A Life Divided, and that is a true crime memoir of what happened, all the ugliness. But at the very end, I also try to generalize my experience to help other homicide survivors react and know what a little bit of what to do, why things happen the way they do. And that's kind of where my second book took up, where that one ended. It's a reference book. It's very different. It's not a memoir. It's a reference book. Um, I had somebody refer to it as it's thick as a Bible. It is. It's about 450 pages. But I wrote it in such a way that every chapter is self-contained. You don't have to read it cover to cover, because some sections of it will not apply to everybody. Like there's a section in there on grief in children. Well, if you don't have children, that won't be relevant. So you don't bother with that chapter. But I organized it longitudinally from the death notification, dealing with the media, what friends can do in the early hours, planning a funeral, understanding the investigation, going to court, understanding grief, understanding the physical fallout, understanding the financial fallout, on down the line up to and including parole of the prisoner and advocacy down the road. And it also has pages of references in there of groups and books. And that's another thing I can recommend people do, is to read firsthand accounts of, and there's a blog entry on that listing them, firsthand accounts of people who are homicide survivors who wrote excellent, like for example, an excellent one is called A Beautiful, Beautiful Ashes. And it's wonderfully written about a young teenager whose mother was murdered in domestic violence. He promised he would, the father. He made good on his promise and burned down the house. That's where the title comes from. And the legal system, this was in Michigan, the legal system didn't do her any favors. She had to live with her father for 3 years before he was arrested, knowing full well he murdered her mother. And they put her on the witness stand testifying against her father. And then they went home together that night.
Oh my God.
It's just craziness stuff. So reading first-hand accounts. Another one is called Getting Life. And it's a true story of a homicide survivor who was wrongly convicted and served 25 years in maximum security, who lost his only son to adoption during the process, and finally was able to, through DNA evidence, get exonerated. And basically when that happens, the system goes, oops,
Mm,
me bad,
mm.
because only 13 states really do much to help you. So reading firsthand accounts is very useful, and it really opens up the lens so you see beyond your own situation.
And will you say your website again, your TikTok
Yeah.
again, and your blog again together?
Blog is on my website.
Hmm.
So just go to www.jancantyphd.com. That's it.
Okay. And they can get
My
to you on
books are there.
TikTok there too?
The TikTok's on there. The books are on there. The blog's on there, and a lot of resources.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jan. It was a pleasure having you on today.
Thank you.
Journey through the valley of the shadow, while I stand tall in the light with me, there is no sense to battle, because I come in peace. I came to set myself free, and if you open your eyes, you will see my divinity.